Jesus said, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not been revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." You may be wondering if I read the wrong gospel when I was writing this sermon, and I assure you I did not. Because as I read today's appointed readings, I was particularly drawn to the passage from Acts. And at first I thought about Dorcas and her good works and how that might make for a good outreach sermon. And yet, the more I contemplated this passage, the more I realized I needed to write about Peter and about Peter's story, and how Peter's story revealed his full maturity of faith in Jesus Christ, and what Peter's story can teach all of us today. Simon was an average guy, a fisherman by trade, with something of a temper, and he could put his foot, sometimes both feet, in his mouth at any given moment. And so one day this man Jesus says, "Follow me, and I will make you fish for people." Off Simon goes, and in what he probably thought was more exciting and less taxing than fishing. Earlier in his story, Simon and the other disciples take a boat to cross over to the other side of a lake, and Jesus stays behind to pray. A storm begins to batter the boat. The disciples are afraid. And when they see Jesus walking on the water toward them, Simon jumps out and begins to walk on water because Jesus called him. Soon, Simon's faith wavers and he begins to sink. Jesus saves him, admonishes him for his lack of faith, and makes the water still. Soon after this event, and the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus asks the question, "Who do you say that I am?" He knows that his time with the disciples is growing short, and he also knows he needs to name someone to carry on his work. Jesus' question reveals who God has chosen to continue Jesus' work on earth: Simon the fisherman. Jesus gives Simon a new name, Peter, the rock, to indicate the life-changing role Simon Peter will now have. Peter now has this new authority, and apparently it goes to his head. Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and undergo great suffering at the hands of the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, "God forbid it, Lord. This must never happen to you." But he turned to him and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." Not a spectacular moment for Peter. Later on, Peter is the one to ask the question of how many times we are to forgive those who wrong us. A great question, one that we probably ask ourselves every day. And it is Peter who says to Jesus, "Look, we have left everything and followed you. What then will we have?" I wonder if Peter wasn't getting a little frustrated with Jesus and his teachings. It would seem that Peter was still looking for a physical, tangible reward for being a follower. He seemed to still be in that mindset of, what's in it for me? Finally, Peter tells Jesus that he will never deny Jesus, even when everyone else may. Of course, Jesus cautions him and says to Peter, "Truly I tell you, this very night, before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times. And Peter does deny Jesus 3 times. And the cock crows. Peter realizes what has happened and proceeds to weep bitterly. The nadir of Peter's faith. In this moment, if we were to compare Peter's faith to that of the hardness of rock, I would say Peter was as firm as talc, the softest rock measured on the Mohs scale. He has hit rock bottom. Then Mary excitedly proclaims, "I have seen the Lord." Peter quickly checks out the empty tomb, and suddenly new hope springs within Peter and the disciples. Finally, Jesus returns to the upper room and makes his presence known. Their faith restored, Jesus breathes the Holy Spirit on them and sends them out to continue the work Jesus began. The disciples' works after Jesus' resurrection are told in the book of Acts, which brings us to today's first reading. We are told that a woman named Tabitha, a follower of the way, who had done many charitable works, has died, and her friends are grief-stricken. A couple of men, knowing that Peter is nearby, call on him to come quickly. And Peter does come, sends everyone out of the room, kneels, prays for a moment, and then calls for Tabitha to get up. And she does. Peter has prayed Tabitha back to life. Peter's faith has reached its fullest. He is now the true rock that Jesus proclaimed him to be. A once diamond in the rough, now perfectly cut to radiate the good news of Jesus Christ throughout his known world. Peter's first century story is as relevant today as it was almost 2,000 years ago. We too are called by Jesus to go out and spread the good news, to love God with all our hearts, our minds, and our souls, to love our neighbors as ourselves. And we are called to put our full faith and trust in God in all things, not just the ones we choose. Of course, just like Peter, we are human and not God. So as we face the daily challenges of living in the busyness of our everyday lives, we may quite often forget to acknowledge and give thanks for all of the gifts God has showered upon us, which is everything we have. We may believe that because of these gifts, we are somehow solely responsible for what we have and think that others just haven't worked hard enough. We may forget that we are called to love one another and care for one another the best way we can, even for people we don't like or don't think worthy of our attention. And just like Peter, we have the potential to come to a fully mature faith through prayer, learning, worship, outreach. We can pray daily, working toward praying throughout the day, so we are aware of God's constant presence in our lives. We can make reading from the Bible a daily habit, made easier by Google. Attending worship services regularly helps build community and allows us to support each other. And reaching out beyond ourselves to help others through donations to the food pantry, volunteering at Loaves and Fishes, Habitat for Humanity, Chapel on the Green, to name a few, reminds us of the incredible, unconditional love God has for all of us. Peter's story is our story. Each of us is a diamond in God's eyes. May we radiate God's infinite, unconditional love today and always. Amen.